Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Pro Dignity No Doubt. I am your hostess, Nicole Smith, and today we're diving into yet another very tough but absolutely necessary conversation. And what we're going to be talking about today is essentially how societies throughout history have, at its root, justified enslaving, exploiting, and dehumanizing people based on an arbitrary standard of worth that those societies set at that point in history. Because I know this is kind of hard truth for a lot of us in the West to really digest and understand, but every culture throughout history has found a way, and in every corner of the earth, let me just back up for a minute. Every culture in history, every corner of the earth has found a way to justify treating certain people groups as, quote, less than, as property, as burdens, as subhuman. And it's all down to this root of who is us and who is them. Because at our core as humans, we have this tendency to want to categorize, right? So who do we see as deserving of equal moral significance, of dignity, and who do we convince ourselves that can be discarded? And there's always a reason why we do that, why society does that, why individuals or certain groups put themselves on the top, and likewise those on the bottom. Because I think it's pretty clear if you just have a cursory glance at human history, human beings have been enslaved, oppressed, even exterminated on the basis of criteria like value, tribal association, race, nationality, gender, religion, social status, perceived utility to society, and the list goes on. They're all different brands of the same thing. It's dignity measurement. We say this a lot in this podcast, dignity measurement. And while we like to believe that we've sort of moved past this phenomena of the barbarism of the past, the reality is we really haven't. We've just become more sophisticated in how we disguise it. So what we're doing today is kind of to try to break it all down. We're going to look at how societies throughout time have justified slavery, exploitation, marginalization, dignity measurement. Yeah. And how that same logic is still actually operating today. And again, another thing I say a lot is that the moment that we measure human worth instead of just simply recognizing it, we are opening the door to justifying any level of cruelty. And so actually let's just start with the word slave itself. So like the most commonly associated form of oppression at the back of our minds in the Western world would be slavery in its traditional sense of, well, somebody's purchased, somebody's sold, right? So that word slave, it actually comes from the word Slav. It's actually referring to the Slavic peoples of Eastern European countries. Essentially between the 9th and 15th centuries, Slavs were the most commonly enslaved people in the world because they were vulnerable. They were politically fragmented. They were economically unstable, militarily weak. And because they could be taken, they were taken. And this group of people, the Slavs, the word Slav, became so closely tied to the concept of bondage that's what gave us the word slave as we know it today. So if we really examine this first real core concept of oppression and where the etymology of this word came from, it really tells us something pretty cruel but very standard, that slavery, oppression, any form of exploitation is really about vulnerability. It begins with identifying who could be used, who could be controlled, who could be discarded with minimal resistance. And that mindset is still deeply embedded in the systems we see today. And again, I know we don't like to admit that, but it's kind of the reality. Because whether it's the Slavic peasants, prisoners of war, trafficked women and children in modern times as we would think of slavery today, the core justification actually remains the same, which is essentially, if they're weak and I'm able to take advantage of them, then duh, I can. So going a little deeper into this concept, and again, sort of putting our purview across the global history to really reiterate for clarity's sake, slavery, exploitation have been justified through countless frameworks. It's not just this idea of like racial identity that the Western, it's like we're being drilled into. There are countless frameworks in which injustice and exploitation have found themselves in: tribalism, gender, religion, social class, physical or cognitive ability. I mean, like the list is as long as an arm, right? But in every single case, a hierarchy of human worth didn't just simply exist. It was actually constructed by the society in that current time. And in every time a society measures human value, like I said, somebody is going to land at the top and somebody's going to land at the bottom. And this kind of brings us to this concept that we need to explore. If human value is a societal construct, like if it can be defined by society, and it is not simply inherent that they're human, check, equal moral significance, then human rights itself actually does not exist. There's no ground to support justice. There's no grounds for pursuit of compassion if human value is defined and not recognized. And so let's just dive deeper into this by asking a simple question. Why do we as humans feel morally obligated to protect the weak, to fight for justice, to show compassion? It's not just like, it's not a product of evolution. The fact that we are enslave more people today than during the height of the transatlantic slave trade is kind of proof that we have not evolved. The reason we feel moral obligations to justice and compassion is because we instinctively know as humans that humans are different from our other counterparts within the animal kingdom. We're not just highly developed animals, we are actually moral beings, and we are the only creatures on the face of the earth that actually can conceive dignity, can conceive justice, can conceive compassion. So like, let's get real for a second. In the animal kingdom, you'll find things that if committed by human beings would be rightly called horrific. Let's just take a male otter, for example. So in pursuit of mating, perpetuating his species, he's been observed as raping and even killing female otters. Through the lens of nature, it actually couldn't be construed as rape or murder because the otter has no concept of right or wrong, because rape and murder are within direct construct and connection to a moral order, because he has no conscience, he has no moral law. The male otter is just following his instincts. Now, if on the inverse, if a human male does the same thing, no one's going to say, well, he was just following his biological instinct. No, we rightly call it rape. We rightly call it murder. We call it evil. Why? Because we know at our heart's center that a human being is morally accountable. He's the only creature that can be held morally accountable because he possesses the capacity to understand the dignity of another person, and that he has the moral obligation to recognize equal moral worth. In the case of our scenario that we painted, the aggravator of injustice, the man that rapes the woman, he has to recognize her equal moral significance. And it's not, he has to, because she's human, not because of her ability or because of her usefulness, but simply just because she's human. There is no measuring stick that can be applied here. And because she has equal moral significance, he doesn't have the right to do whatever he wants with his body in whatever way he chooses. He cannot just follow instinct. He must restrain that instinct, because if we support his right to do that, it's an injustice. If it's flying in the face of a moral order that we can all agree on. You can't rape and you can't murder. And it's only something that we can apply to the human animal, not every other animal within the animal kingdom. And that's kind of the whole point. Compassion and justice only exist because we are human. They only make sense if human value is intrinsic. It's not something that's earned or measured or granted. If every person within themselves carries the holy image of God, and I believe that as a Christian, but even if you don't believe in that God, the Christian God, right? That there is a natural distinctiveness among human animals. But me as a Christian, I believe that we're holy image bearers. Then slavery, exploitation, any form of dehumanization is an affront to that holy image. It's an affront to our distinctiveness as humans. And essentially, it means that if injustice is carried out, there are only two right responses. One, there must be justice for the aggressor, not just for the form of consequences for the individual, but confronting the system that would actually build the injustice and allow it to thrive. The second would be compassion for those who have received that injustice. And it's not just out of pity, it's recognizing their dignity, and that dignity demands our presence, our advocacy, our solidarity at times. But if we lose sight of this, if we allow culture to dictate who's valuable and who isn't, even if we can find in ourselves some really strong justification for that measurement, we essentially are going to descend into a world where only the strong survive, and human worth is essentially a commodity. So whether it's ancient slavery based on tribe or modern trafficking, whether it's violence such as rape or the quiet erasure of the disabled or the unborn, any system that tries to measure human worth, it is an absolute lie. Because human dignity is either inherent and equal, or it is not. There is no halfways in this game. And if it is not, there's no real foundation for justice, no justification for compassion, no real reason to protect the weak. But if it is, if every human life is sacred simply because it's human, then we are not only free to demand that truth, we're also obligated to it. We need to uphold that truth. We have to stand up for the injustices and show compassion. So here's my ask today. We're one of the only spaces that's discussing the foundation of human value and the dangers of creating systems that are in affront to dignity. And for those of you who know that we're in partnership with an organization called Dignity Defense Institute, and its mission is really to take people with real lived experiences of injustice, those that have been trafficked, families that have experienced hardships, and we allow those stories to create awareness within the space and to educate on the human value at its root. And we really need partners in this, because the reality is that if we don't have partners, this message just doesn't get out there in the way that it needs to. And what we need are monthly partners. And I'm not one to normally do this to make the ask from this forum, but the reality is, again, like, it's not going to get out there if there's not money backing it. So even if it's like $5 a month, that would really allow us to continue to speak the truth about the foundation of human life and how society is actively working against that image. It allows us to continue to advocate for the vulnerable. We actually do a lot of one-on-one advocacy work with those that have been trafficked, those that have experienced injustice, those that are experiencing struggle, like, a mother that has had to give birth to a child in a world that she doesn't have a support system, families that have children with disabilities, kind of like my experience and that kind of stuff. We really work hand in hand with those families to find the resources that they need to really thrive in their life, And we really need partners to help us shape culture, and that a culture that is going to refuse to dehumanize. And again, we can't do this alone. We've got to do it together. We can create a world where dignity is recognized, defended, and restored, no matter the measure. And thank you so much for listening to me ramble on about these issues. And I really welcome you to come back to our next episode in a few weeks. And for dignity, no doubt, I'm Nicole Smith. Thanks for listening.